For the time we have together on this occasion, I want to talk about a pandemic that's worse than COVID-19. It's been around a lot longer. People have become numb to it, almost as though it doesn't even exist, and yet its pervasiveness is something that is increasingly worse in not just our culture but around the world. The pandemic of apathy. In the World Book Encyclopedia, in the dictionary of the World Book, apathy is defined in these ways. Lack of interest or desire for activity. Indifference. It shows an unconcern. There's a lack of feeling. In fact, if we actually look up the term indifferent in this same dictionary, what do we find? Indifferent, having no feeling for or against, having or showing no interest, not mattering much, unimportant. If I look at that definition in Webster's unabridged dictionary, do I find anything that adds to that concept? Or is it still basically the same? Apathy. Lack of emotion. Lack of interest. Listless condition. Impassiveness. Lethargic. Unconcerned. No one wants to be thought of in those kind of conditions, or they shouldn't desire that. However, it's something that seems pervasive in so many ways. And people can be indifferent in all sorts of manners and apathetic and unconcerned about things that really are significant and of vital importance in our civilization. On numerous occasions, we've talked about the wisdom book of the Hebrews, the book of Proverbs. In fact, we've even talked about chapter 1 of Proverbs on prior occasions. And we've noted that wisdom is personified as given a voice. And you see wisdom calling to unreflective humanity. We see wisdom's indictment against those people that are dull of hearing, that could care less. In fact, I remember hearing a story of a teacher that called out one of her students and talked about the fact he seemed indifferent to learning. Anything that they would discuss in class, he was just not interested in the least. And he said, "You're just totally apathetic." In fact, she said, "Can you define apathy?" And his response was, "I don't know and I don't care," which is exactly what apathy is. If we actually don't look at it from the standpoint of wisdom's personification and what wisdom actually calls for, what wisdom recognizes, let's take a look at Proverbs chapter 1 in a different way. What does it have to do with apathy? With an apathetic culture such as ours. To begin with, in verse 20 through 23, the problem is wisdom cries out against apathy. Here's what wisdom says. Wisdom cries aloud in the street. In the markets she raises her voice. At the head of the noisy streets she cries out. At the entrance of the city gates she speaks. And this is what wisdom says. How long, O simple ones, will you love being simple? How long will scoffers delight in their scoffing, and fools hate knowledge? If you turn to my reproof, behold, I will pour out my spirit of wisdom to you, and I will make my words known to you. Learning is something you have to desire. It's interesting that one of the synonyms in Webster's unabridged that goes along with being apathetic or being filled with apathy is the word stolid. Stolid means you have no kind of emotion whatsoever. You show no kind of emotion one way or another. And among the synonyms for stolid, the word dull and the word stupid. Nobody wants to be viewed that way. So why do people act that way? And here is the cry of wisdom against those that are apathetic. Knowledge is at your fingertips and you don't want it at all. How long will you love being simple-minded? How long will scoffers delight in their scoffing and fools hate knowledge? And then as you go down further in this first chapter, beginning in verse 24 down to verse 28, the consequences of apathy. Because I've called and you refused to listen, have stretched out my hand and no one has heeded, because you've ignored all my counsel and would have none of my reproof, this is what happens. I will laugh at your calamity. I will mock when terror strikes you like a storm, and your calamity comes like a whirlwind, when distress and anguish come upon you. Then they will call upon me, but I will not answer. They will seek me, they will seek wisdom diligently, but will not find me. Because they patterned their life in such a way that they can't even envision what knowledge actually looks like. Wisdom is something that's evasive. They can't recognize it. The cause of that apathy, verse 29 and verse 30. Because they hated knowledge and did not choose the fear of the Lord, they would have none of my counsel, and they despised all my reproof. And that apathy in culture is an unwillingness. It's an unwillingness to be consistent in the way that people analyze things or view things. To be unwilling to examine the details or the context of particular subjects, or even different points of view. An unwillingness to think for one's self, mimicking or parroting of what you hear without actually analyzing whether or not what you hear is correct or not. You're just voicing something you've always heard without giving any kind of thought to it at all. That's really not the mark of intelligence. In verse 31 through 33, they're contrasting results. In verse 31 and 32, negatively, they shall eat the fruit of their way and have their fill of their own devices, for the simple are killed by their turning away, and the complacency of fools destroys them. You have no idea what's happening and you don't care until it's too late. The positive contrast, verse 33, whoever listens to wisdom will dwell secure and will be at ease without dread of disaster. Sometimes that apathy, that apathetic point of view, is an unwillingness to view something other than yourself as authoritative. You're the authority. You determine what's right and what's wrong. You determine what you're going to follow and what you're not going to follow, not based upon any logic or rationality or common sense. Years ago I heard somebody say that common sense is very abundant in our culture because fewer and fewer people use any. I think that's a very true statement. Just look around. The statement that is made ultimately that whoever listens to wisdom will dwell secure is something that should be taken to heart. If I live in a way that I am indifferent, these are the conclusions I have made, and don't confuse me with any facts to the contrary, that's really not the mark of intelligence. It's not the mark of somebody who is academic in their viewpoint or way of thinking, or scientific in their analysis. Ultimately, it's just the opposite. Sometimes we need to consider that our analysis may be flawed, irrational, incomplete, inconsistent. I need to be willing to say, yeah, I think I actually reached conclusions that are not warranted by the context. I accepted a flawed view of culture that culture is pushing, which makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. But since millions buy into it, I'll buy into it as well. Indeed, a whole culture become apathetic to the truth. And we see that in our country every single day. May we encourage people on a quest for knowledge, consistency, rational thinking. May we encourage people to become wise with the knowledge that they possess and continue to learn and continue to grow. Because if you stop analyzing, if you stop learning, if you stop questioning, if you stop looking at everything that you find in this life, you eventually stagnate and find yourself in the stupor of apathy, a pandemic that unfortunately doesn't look like it's going to end anytime soon. Please stay safe, stay intellectually healthy, continue to study God's Word. We'll talk again soon.